They don't care. They are literally setting up a tax on breathing, a tax on the size of your home, a tax on how many cars and children you have. And by the way, we have a story out of China. Apparently, they're talking about possibly repealing the one-child policy in China. Now, why would they do such a thing? Well, they understand this is a strong point for demonization and really realization that it is a military-type police state in China, that communism isn't good, that Mao is not our hero, that they are a pro-eugenic society. Now, does this mean they're really going to drop the one-child policy? No, they're going to ease it into the background and basically popularize examples where they let families have 2 children. Oh, wow, you'll allow me to have 2 children. Meanwhile, Ted Turner says that everybody in the world's got to pledge that 1 or 2 children is it. And he says voluntarily, but he by no means that it should be voluntary. He's the president of the United Nations Foundation. He is pro-population control. He's the eugenics king, the guy who owns more landmass than any other person in the world, and he's going to tell me how many children I can have. And when you read this is out of the Associated Press, off the bat, they're demonizing these guys for having more than 1 child. When asked why she and her husband don't want a second child, I can't even pronounce it, smiles at her pudgy 9-year-old son and does a quick tally of the family budget. Her salary as a cleaning lady and the income for a mahjong parlor in the spare room barely covers their son's school fees and other expenses. See, they can't afford to send their son to school. They can't afford to feed them in their slave labor conditions, so they're not allowed to have more children. With just 1, we can give him nicer things. But if we tried to split that, we have between 2 or 3, they would end up with nothing, the 34-year-old says in her home of Daifeng. And that is the plan for the United States of America. Begin to bankrupt the populace in a manner where you can demonize them for having children. And there are already so many examples of those people out there that don't want to work, that want to live off the state, that do have a bunch of kids, that they rally all these other people that do work, that pay all these taxes and say, see, these people are the reason that you're paying higher taxes. No, they're not the reason. They're a very small portion of the taxes that you're paying. The reason is that out-of-control banksters have decided to tax everything under the sun and including the sun. Let me repeat that. Everything under the sun, and now including the sun. That's the idea behind global warming. They don't want to talk about solar flares. They don't want to talk about the Earth changing naturally. Yes, that's right. The Earth changes. It's a living being. You know, I'm not saying it has a soul, but you got to understand, the Earth is a life form. It is a life force. It is constantly changing. And can man have an effect on that? Absolutely. But are we the ones behind this quote-unquote non-existent global warming that the UN now admits has not been going on for the last 10-plus years, as well as glaciers melting that are non-existent? Of course not. We're taking your calls on the other side. It's 888-201-2244. It's the Info Warrior with Jason Bermas.
The next stop is Vietnam.
We are back. It's the Info Warrior with Jason Bermas. And again, as we move towards a society more like China, where they try to regulate every single thing we do, how many children we're allowed to live, or allowed to have, how big our home is allowed to be, how many cars we're allowed to have, how much tax we have to pay, they have to make it seem like China is moving more in our direction. As we become more and more like their society, they're wearing the Levi's blue jeans and drinking the Coca-Cola and eating the processed food like McDonald's. So they move towards our society as we move towards theirs. We're going to take your calls, and then on the other side, we're going to play the chapter of World Trade Center 7 out of my, not my last film anymore. I've got Invisible Empire out there, but Fabled Enemies, the film before that one. All right, let's go to our first caller. Let's go to Jesse in Texas. Jesse, you're on the line. Yes, sir.
Hey, what's up, Jason? Yesterday I went out to eat with a friend of mine, and I had mentioned to her that I said that 9/11 happened to be an inside job, and I mentioned about Tower 7 and how that was a controlled demolition. So I'm trying to get her to sort of see things differently. So, I'm trying to do my part as far as, letting people know that these people are fascist. Well, bastards. I don't know if I can say that on there, but yeah. So
no, they're bastards. They absolutely are. They're cold-blooded killers, Jesse. They are cold-blooded killers. They killed 3,000 plus people on 9/11. They undoubtedly blew up World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7. 7 being the most obvious example of a controlled demolition in the fact that it was actually done in the regular bottom down instead of a top down demolition. It was a not so much a bottom up, but it came from the bottom first. You can see it basically fall into its own footprint. And you watch the World Trade Center demolitions, and they were a top down demolition. Now debunkers will sit there and say, "There's no such thing as a top down demolition, Jason. I ain't never seen no top down demolition." We played several of them on the air here on the InfoWarrior, and we may just do that again today. Kevin in Georgia. Kevin, you're on the line. Yes, sir.
Hey, Jason. Just calling in. Wanted to congratulate you on Invisible Empire and also congratulate Alex on Police State 4. Great films.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I was calling in. I wanted to ask you to get your mind and your thoughts on the Freemasons and how they are connected to the Illuminati. I'm currently reading The Illuminati 2012 by Nishan A. Kimapiro, and Mark Dice touched on this in the Resistance Manifesto, and just wanted to get your intake on that.
Sure. Kevin, have you ever heard of a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy?
Absolutely.
Now, Proofs of a Conspiracy is a guy by John Robison, and it comes at it kind of as a pro-Mason perspective. He's a Mason in the original Scottish lodges out in Europe, and I've read this book, and it's very interesting. He kind of takes you step by step of the Illuminati infiltration into Masonry. Now, does that mean that I necessarily think that Masonry was good before, I guess, the quote-unquote Illuminati and the Weishaupt crowd got in there? I don't know. I really don't know where these schools, these mystery Babylon schools, really derive from. There's a ton of theories out there. There's a ton of things to look at. But I really like that book in the sense that it shows you how the Masons were really usurped during the late 1700s and well into the 1800s. And I think that the way that the Masons fit in is that, a lot of the high-level guys are into the occult and into these upper echelons of Masonry. But then on the other end, they use the Porch Masons for programs like CHIP, which is this child protection program where you go get your kid DNA databased, and they take his thumbprint and a DNA swab and his teeth records and all this other stuff to put you into the system. So on the upper echelons of the Masons, you actually do have people that do rule things and run things and decide the way that our lives go, sometimes based on this occultic philosophy that I really don't understand, but you look at these guys and they are into the cult. And then you have the lower level guys that kind of think that they're just part of a beer drinking after fraternity. And they're used to kind of implement their smaller level plans and gain acceptance in the general public. So I hope that answered your question, Kevin. I appreciate the call. Let's go to Dan in Connecticut. Dan, you're on the line.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, I need your help to start a trend. I'm actually a candidate for Congress, and what I did is I swore under penalty of perjury different things that I would do in office. And if you go to realdealforcongress.com, you can see that pledge. I basically want to make sure that I can get as many candidates as possible to commit to that, because we've seen too many people.
All right, Dan, we'll be back after this. It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Bermas, PrisonPlanet.tv, Infowars.com. We are back. It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Bermas. And I just want to say right here, folks, I'm not much of a trendsetter, but I am behind those that are behind the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So I hope you check out that guy's website and get behind his campaign if he truly does stand for something and that those pledges are positive ones. All right, I'm going to take a couple more callers, and then we're going to get into this new admission and play the chapter, The Third Skyscraper, from Fabled Enemies. Yes, we now know that this pro-authoritarian, pro-war writer who was there, he was there on 9/11. And Building 7 wasn't a controlled demolition, but he did hear the Con Edison workers and others discussing how Larry Silverstein was contacting his insurance company prior to the falling of Building 7 to see if he could pull off a controlled demolition there. You got to understand, these buildings were pre-wired. Building 7 alone had the largest CIA station outside of Langley, Virginia. They had other secret CIA offices in the Twin Towers. That's the reality. So let's take a couple more calls, and then we're going to hit up the third skyscraper. Let's go to Philip in Virginia, 888-201-2244. Philip, you're on the line.